Hi, it's Josh here to talk about some board games again. Even though I only played 6 unique games in the month of October, it was quite an exceptional month. And not just because all 6 games were rated 7 out of 10 or higher, which means that everything I played was at least very good, but because 3 of these games are brand new, and not only that, but 2 of them ended up being so good that I want to make dedicated videos for each of those 2 games. So yes, October was a great month for gaming despite only 6 different games being played. Now just a brief update on the personal update video I did recently. If you don't want to hear about me complaining about the fact that I'm sick all the time, that's why I have this video divided up into chapters. You can skip ahead if you like. But essentially, I have been feeling not the greatest over the past year. I kind of attributed it to my usual health problems, but then a couple months ago when my doctor increased the dose of my cholesterol medication, these symptoms started to get much worse. A number of things were happening, including just a lot of fatigue and this kind of 100-pound weight that I felt like I was dragging around all the time that I was attributing to my depression. Perhaps was more to do with side effects of the medication. So I ended up this past week just taking myself off of the cholesterol medication, realizing that the negative effects of it were outweighing whatever positive effects it was doing for me. And so hopefully once that kind of works its way out of my system, maybe I'll feel a little bit better and we'll be able to be a little bit healthier in terms of both diet and exercise and that sort of thing. But yeah, realizing that the just extreme fatigue of the past couple of months might be due to the medication was potentially helpful, if that's what it ended up being. But back to the fun stuff. I acquired 3 games in the month of October. I picked up a game called Beer and Bread, another one called The Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, and then a third one called Agent Avenue. The one common denominator with all 3 of those games is that they are all fairly small, strictly 2-player games. So it kind of makes sense for me, with most of my adult board gaming being with just one other player, that having more 2-player games in my collection would be something that would certainly get played. I have to send out a big thank you to my Patreon supporters for the ability to even pick up new board games, without whom I just wouldn't be able to kind of explore new and exciting things. So just a big thank you to my Patreon supporters, especially my higher tier supporters, Joanna, Abe, and Asmonda's Perfect. My life literally has more fun in it thanks to your generosity. Now, going through these games played in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game, we start with one of the brand new games, a game called Beer and Bread. I accidentally purchased this game because I found this new to me board game store, well, tabletop gaming store, I guess, that isn't too far from me, and it's a big store that I didn't even know existed. To be honest though, it focuses a lot on tabletop minis wargaming like Warhammer 40k, as well as collectible card games like Magic and Pokemon and that sort of thing, and their board game selection is quite small. But I was in there looking at some painting supplies and was browsing through the few board games they did have, and noticed this game called Beer and Bread. The title spoke to me immediately, obviously with beer and bread being 2 of the greatest things humans have ever made, even though I can't drink beer anymore thanks to my Crohn's disease. And yes, I do miss it terribly, especially on hot summer days when I'm driving by a pub patio and seeing all those people drinking their cold pints of beer on the patio in the sun. It gives me a twinge in the old heart there, but you know, I have my at least tattoo dedicated to Lef beer, because nobody makes better beer than the Belgians. Sorry, Czech Republic and Germany and North American craft breweries, with your never knowing when to stop with your hops. But that's all that's left of my beer enjoying days nowadays. So anyways, I saw the theme, or saw the title, picked up the box, noticed it was by Scott Alms, who is a designer that's done a ton of different stuff, especially the whole Tiny Epic series of games, of which I used to own Tiny Epic Galaxies, which was quite a great little game, but you know, it ended up being sold off in one of my collection downsizing auctions. I then noticed it was a strictly 2-player game with multi-use cards and lots of interesting wooden resources happening on the board. I thought, you know, I think I got to pick this up. It was reasonably priced, just a little 2-player game, and so I picked it up, gave it a try. Paul and I played it, and what's kind of interesting in the way that it's scored is that throughout the course of the game, players are making bread and they're making beer, each of which gives you separate scores at the end of the game, and your final score to determine who wins is the lower of your beer or bread scores. So whichever of your beer or bread has scored lower, that's your final score. You compare that to your opponent's score and see who wins. So I squeaked out a victory, 21 points on my beer score, which was my lower score, to Paul's 20 points from his bread score, which was his lower score. And it was interesting. If there's a tie on the player's lower scores, then you look at the other scores to see what the tiebreaker is, and if we had tied, it actually would have gone to Paul for the victory because he had 32 points for his beer score, whereas I had 31 points for my bread score. So the real score of the game was 1 point apart, and if we had gone to the tiebreaker, it would have still been just 1 point apart. So it's a fun little game with multi-use cards, trying to determine how to best use the cards in hand each round. There's a little bit of awkwardness in having to pass cards back and forth with your opponent. Overall, it was a very good game, well designed, well produced. I rated it 7 out of 10. Paul gave it a rating of 7.5 out of 10. But ultimately, I have already sold it off in my most recent board game auction because 7 out of 10 games, as good as they are, aren't necessarily in that greatness level to stay in my collection and to remain within the roughly 100 games that I keep permanently at home here. So as much as I would have enjoyed playing it again, it wouldn't have been a priority, and it is unlikely we would have gotten back to it anytime soon. From a new game, we go back to an old game, and my younger son Wyatt asked me to play Nexus Ops with him again, which is this little 4X game, explore, exploit, expand, and exterminate, where players are trying to basically build up their little armies of aliens and destroy each other on the map. We didn't have a ton of time, so I made kind of a shortened game where we played up to 9 victory points, which I ended up winning 9 points to Wyatt's 7. I've talked about in the past how I don't love these type of conquest games nearly as much as I used to, but this one, being as simple and fast playing as it is still one that I keep in my collection. The only problem is playing it with 2 players, it really does have a serious snowball effect, because as soon as one player starts to build up that edge over the other player, it's almost impossible for the other player to kind of catch up as that snowball gains ground. And this is something that I found out in my last play of the game, because in my last recorded play, I once again did a 2-player game against Paul in July of 2023, and at that time I had recorded that Paul had really ran over me with the game, and that it is probably best with 4 players, which this 2-player game with Wyatt kind of confirmed as well. I do rate the game 7 out of 10. When I had played it with Paul that time, he had rated it 7.5 out of 10. And I should have asked Wyatt what his rating is. Maybe I'll do that at some point. Next up, in a rare moment for me, I'm going to talk about some of the new hotness, because I'm going to be talking now about the Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth, which is essentially a re-implementation of one of my old favorite 2-player games, a game called Seven Wonders Duel. When I saw that they were kind of remaking the game and releasing it with a Lord of the Rings theme, I thought, oh, that sounds cool. However, I'm not really interested in picking it up because I do really enjoy Seven Wonders Duel, along with the expansion that I had for it called Pantheon, and I really enjoy the Ancient Civilizations theme of the original Seven Wonders Duel as much as I do obviously enjoy Lord of the Rings as a theme. But just because a game sticks Lord of the Rings on the artwork and the thematic aspect of it doesn't mean I'm going to jump out and buy it, because since I am a Lord of the Rings fan, I do tend to only like a Lord of the Rings themed game if it is highly thematic. So, I mean, obviously my gigantic War of the Ring game is the prime example of a top tier Lord of the Rings game. There's another one I don't have called Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, which is kind of a re-implementation of an old classic game whose name is escaping me right now. I'll have to put that on screen. But thematically, it's done really well too, and that's, one that I could see owning at some point if I find a deal on it somewhere. But anyways, my intention was to not purchase this game until I started looking into it and reading up on it. And I saw the changes that they had made, and in particular that they had this little game map with little wooden armies and towers on it that players built and moved around. And that was kind of the tipping point for me where I was like, oh my gosh, this looks really cool. And I saw that it was actually a simplified version of Seven Wonders Duel, and ultimately I thought, okay, I gotta pick this up, and I'm so glad I did because it is really well done. I will say that in terms of gameplay, it is quite comparable to Seven Wonders Duel with the Pantheon expansion. However, this version of the game is very much simplified and streamlined so that it is very easy to get into a game. It's remarkably quick to play. Once two players are familiar with the game and experienced with a player two, I'm sure they could knock off a game easily in probably 20 minutes. So from that point of view, it's a much more approachable game to try with my kids at some point. And that's kind of ultimately what made me decide to sell off my Seven Wonders Duel with the Pantheon expansion. Even though I think that Seven Wonders Duel with its expansions is probably a better game for more of a kind of hardcore board game hobbyist because it's a deeper, more complex game experience. Whereas this one is just simple, fast, and fun. And ultimately, I decided that this is the kind of play experience I wanted to keep at home here for me and my kids. And when I did get to try it with Paul, it was a really close game. So both players in this game are competing for victory, for dominance on that map, like I mentioned, with the armies and the towers and stuff. However, there are 3 instant win conditions in the game that will immediately end the game. One is related to the map. If a player gets presence in all the regions on the map, they immediately win. One is the ring track, where if either Frodo and Sam reach Mount Doom or the Black Riders catch Frodo and Sam, immediate victory for the corresponding player. And then the final one is making alliances with the different races in Middle-earth. If you manage to ally with 6 different races, instant victory. So at one point in the game, Paul was about to win a victory, a board-based victory on the map there, but I managed to stop that from happening. And then I was about to win a victory with the races that were on the map. And at one point, I just had to say to Paul, listen, if you take that card, you're going to leave me that last race and I'm going to win right now. So we kind of managed to dodge that bullet there. I don't want to win just because a player doesn't happen to notice something. I want to kind of win legitimately if I do win. But then on the very last turn of the game, the very last card that I picked up, I was able to actually turn the tide on the board and win an instant board victory. So I'm not sure at this point who would have won if we had to... Oh, I guess I would have won if we'd gone to the board victory conditions. If I hadn't won the instant board victory, obviously I had enough to win in that manner as well. But anyways, like I said, I really love the stripped down simplicity as well as the action that's happening on that board there. I think I'm going to try to do a dedicated video for this game at some point, although most of what I would say in that video I've covered here briefly anyways. I had given this game the same rating as Seven Wonders Duel, which is 8 out of 10, but I don't know. Further plays could maybe see that rise a little bit. Paul rated this game 8 out of 10 as well. Just to compare those ratings to Seven Wonders Duel, like I said, this is the same rating I gave Seven Wonders Duel, 8 out of 10. Paul gave Seven Wonders Duel a rating of 8.5 out of 10, so his rating of 8 out of 10 on this game is just a slight reduction in comparison to that one. A couple of months ago, I had mentioned that I had gotten the giant civilization game Clash of Cultures Monumental Edition to the table with one of my brothers and a couple of his friends, and I was so excited that we were able to do so again. So we got the same 4 players together for a second play of the game. So all 3 of them had been new to this game and were just kind of learning the ropes there. And the gameplay at that point had taken us 7 hours just to play through the game once. So now that we were all experienced with it, we were able to get back together and play it again. This time when I set up the game, I set it up for my slightly escalated game opening where players started with a bit more things on the map, an extra advance or 2 on their technology board, just because I was thinking it would help to get the game rolling a little bit more from the early game and kind of speed up the playtime. However, when everybody arrived to play, they all 3 unanimously agreed that they wanted to start from the very beginning with their 1 settler and 1 city and kind of play through the entire game. So I was like, Fantastic. Let's not speed this up. Let's get the whole game experience. Now, if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to kind of read my notes here to see what exactly happened, because it was a pretty interesting game. On the first game round, I was the last player to act in turn order. So while everybody else recruited another settler and started getting out to explore the map, I decided to try something different and started focusing on gaining advances and getting a head start on getting ahead in my technology. Oh, by the way, I was playing as the Egyptian civilization in this game. Our friend Eric was playing as the Vikings, and he did well with his ship-based exploration throughout the game and really took advantage of his ship-based technologies. My younger brother was the Japanese, and he also did extremely well by kind of leaving the Vikings and the fourth player, the Aztecs, to beat up on everybody and kind of focused on his own peaceful objectives. And he even managed to fulfill 6 objective cards in a single turn near the end of the game for a windfall of 12 victory points in a single round, which is practically unheard of. I've certainly never seen anything like it. A player completing 6 objectives simultaneously. Yeah, and then the fourth player, Andrew the Aztec, was using his military and his ability to take captives and do human sacrifices to gain bonuses, and he was using all that to good effect. Ultimately, though, for my point of view as the Egyptians, with the focus on gaining advances, I really kind of felt like I was spinning my wheels and really not making much progress on the game map. Even though I did end up with a lot of advances, ultimately I didn't feel like it was helping me as much as I would have liked. On the very final turn of the game, I had the option of building one more building for a certain 2 victory points, or I could do a risky all-out attack with my entire army in an attempt to regain a former city which had been captured by another player. I think it was the Aztecs. And that would have allowed me to regain 3 victory points and take those 3 victory points directly from the Aztecs. And so I was like, you know me, got to go for the exciting option. So I did the big attack, lost it horribly. When the game ended, I had 0 surviving land or sea units anywhere on the map, and my entire board presence after all these hours of play was an angry city with 3 buildings and one other neutral city with no buildings in it, as well as a single building in an Aztec city that I had culturally influenced. So, once again, I failed to make my civilization go anywhere. We did manage to shave off an hour and a half of playtime in comparison to our first game, so this game lasted 5.5 hours of playtime in comparison to 7 hours for the first game. In terms of the final scores, I ended up in last place as Egypt with 37.5 victory points. In the previous game, I was also last place with 44.5 victory points, so I did worse than last time in terms of my final score. In third place, we had Eric the Red with the Vikings with 43.5 victory points. Whereas last game he had 48.5, so he ended up with fewer points as well. Andrew the Aztec ended up with 43.5 points as well. So, I guess they ended up being tied for second, and I came in third place, not fourth, if you want to look at it that way. But last game he had just edged out Eric with 49 victory points. This time he tied Eric, and so it's pretty funny because last game they were half a victory point apart. This time they tied for points. And then just like with our previous game, my brother won, this time as a Japanese, with 47 victory points. Last game he had 52, so overall there were fewer points to go around. I think we were kind of beating up on each other a little bit more this game compared to the first time around. Although it is kind of interesting that the final distribution of victory points was almost an exact copy of last game's, just maybe around 5 victory points lower than it was the first time around. That being said, this game also did end a couple of turns earlier than the previous game because we were playing the random dice roll to determine the game end. So, I mean, maybe that was a factor too with getting fewer victory points. Anyways, it was a lot of fun, even though, like I said, I felt a certain amount of frustration with spinning my wheels and having trouble making progress with anything other than the technological advances. If we do play again at some point, I'd love to play as the Huns and focus more on my board presence and just kind of moving around the map than just kind of plopping cubes into my technologies. I still rate this game about an 8.5 out of 10. Kind of on the high end of what I would like to give it. There's something about this type of game where it feels like there should be more because it's such an epic game, but you're always fighting your limited resources and the constrictions that are in place in the game, and feeling like you want to kind of make more progress with your civilization. And so there's an underlying feeling of frustration there for me. But part of that is probably me not playing optimally too. So anyways, I forget if I asked the other guys if their ratings had changed. I'll put up on screen some ratings if I have some of that recorded somewhere. Second best game of the month was the third brand new game, and this is a little wee two-player card game called Agent Avenue. Just like with my other two new games of the month, I didn't really intend to purchase it, but I stumbled across some people on BoardGameGeek talking about the game, and when I read about it, I thought, this seems like a game that would be really worthwhile to have, not just for myself, but with my older son, Evan. He every so often we'll have friends coming over to play games with them who are non-gamers, and so they kind of struggle a little bit with some of the games he introduces because of the rules complexity and the length of play and whatnot. But this game is so simple, so fast. I was like, I got to get hold of this. There wasn't anywhere to purchase this game in North America, so I ended up buying it directly from the publisher. I think it came to me from Germany, so I paid for the game plus the shipping from Europe, which it ended up being relatively reasonably priced overall, to be honest with you, especially with the cost of shipping nowadays. It was pretty cheap. But this is another one, like I said, I want to do a dedicated video about this game because it is incredibly simple and incredibly quick to play. But while you're playing it, it's incredibly tense, but incredibly fun too. So it's funny, after I played it with Wyatt stated that he didn't know a game could be this easy and this hard, which is a great way to sum up the game. Even the production of the game is really well done. Every single card in the game has unique artwork on it, which is a nice touch, even though the whole anthropomorphic animals thing, I'm not always a huge fan of. In fact, I even sleeved all the cards in the game, and generally I'm kind of an anti-sleever. I don't like the feel of sleeves on cards, but because of how much this game gets shuffled over and over again, and because of the importance of not knowing what each individual card is, so any marking that turns up on a card could give away its identity, and that would kind of ruin the game. So this is a rare game that I took the time to sleeve. And the first time I played it two players with Paul. Two players, it is only a two-player game. I played it with Paul. We played about half a dozen times because each individual game takes, once you get to know the game, under 5 minutes most of the time. And of those half a dozen first games I played with Paul, I won maybe one time there. But then later on, I introduced the game to Evan, and we ended up playing about 10 to 12 more games. Evan kept saying, oh, just one more. And then I would beat him, and he'd be like, oh, just one more. And I'd beat him again. And he'd be like, oh, just one more. Until he actually won a game. But then the very next day, Evan asked to play again, and so we played about 7 or 8 more games. And then the day after that, Wyatt asked to give it a try, so I played it with Wyatt as well. So in a very short period of time, I've played this game well over a couple of dozen times. I keep saying that it's a two-player only game, but there are rules in here that allow for team games with 3 or 4 players that, to be quite honest, it looks like it would be a terrible experience. I don't think I'd ever want to even try it. However, for people who want just a real quick, simple two-player card game with agonizing decisions and a lot of fun, this is a must-have, really. I rate the game 9 out of 10. Paul gave it an 8.5 out of 10. Evan gave it a 9.25 out of 10. And then Wyatt an 8.5 out of 10. So the lowest ratings amongst all 4 of us was 8.5 out of 10. So that should tell you what a hit this particular little card game was. Hopefully it'll get wider distribution and it'll show up in North America. And then top game of the month was Kingdomino Origins, two-player with Paul, an old favorite with both of us. This time the game just totally came together for me. I managed to complete my 7x7 grid with no gaps in it, which is pretty unusual for me. Usually I ended up with a couple of holes in my grid because I don't build it correctly. So just like last month, I seem to have a grasp on how to actually play board games now, and I ended up winning 187 points to 142, so it was a bit of a blowout this time around. Like I said, it's a big favorite with Paul and I rate it 9 out of 10. Paul gives it a 9 out of 10, and when I played it in the past with Evan, he had given it an 8 out of 10. So that was my excellent month of October. What have you been playing? Have you purchased any new games lately? I would love to hear about your board gaming life recently. Please do get into the comments and tell me all about it. And thanks so much for watching. Cheers. Kind of makes sense for me with most of my board gaming. It kind of makes sense for me with most of my, and what I ended up, when we were, so even though so both the real score of the game, from a new game we go back to an old game, and Wyatt, I'm going to talk about some of the hot new that I had gotten, the giant civilization game Civ. Now, if you forgive, and my entire board ref. That being said, this game also did end up a couple of